Welcome to another edition of the Workers Podcast, where we discuss the issues that matter most to workers and help you better understand your rights, responsibilities, and the realities of today's workplace. In this episode, we're taking a closer look at human resources, commonly known as HR. What exactly is the role of HR within an organization? Who does HR represent? And how can employees effectively engage with HR to address concerns, advance their careers, and contribute to a positive work environment? Now, joining us for this episode and this important discussion is Calisha Spencer, an experienced HR leader and a columnist behind the HR Room, a popular feature in the Daily Observer. Calisha, thank you so much for joining us here on the Workers Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Now, we'll jump right in. Tell us, what is the primary role of HR within an organization?
Simply put, the primary role of HR is to align people and business objectives. A little bit more extensive than that, but HR looks at the scope of from your recruitment to your onboarding, to people's well-beings, and then looking at the objectives of the company and ensuring that organizational goals and strategies are actually met and fulfilled.
Okay, excellent. Now, many of us have worked in environments where there is no HR department, or maybe we may not have been aware that there's an HR department or officer. Go into a bit more detail in terms of the advantages of having an HR officer or HR department in place in an organization.
So, persons would think that HR is not important, or I don't need to hire an HR practitioner because I can do it myself. But then you leave room for inconsistencies as it relates to disciplinaries, disparities as it relates to wages, inconsistency again as it relates to hiring practices and disciplinary. So HR is important, and then you have those conversations that need a special touch.
Okay, yes.
So that the union doesn't have to have a follow-up conversation if it is not handled properly. So I would say that the role of HR is definitely important, and those are some of the things that HR more or less mitigates within an organization.
Okay, so it will ensure that there's that smooth transition, communication between the union, the employee, and the employer. And that brings me to my next question. Who does HR represent, the employee or the employer? And my feeling is that there's a delicate balance between both, but you're the expert, enlighten us.
So there's a misconception about HR. And I've heard this from since I've entered the field. HR only looks out for management. I'm sure you've heard that.
Of course.
I would say that HR looks out for both interests, both company interests, which is employer, and employees' interest. So essentially, both.
So that's one misconception. What are some other misconceptions that you've encountered that people have about HR?
This is not fair, this is not right, HR has a one-track approach, when really HR handles out some of the fires that our employees don't necessarily see. So HR sort of stop the fires before it comes. In addition to that, I think that HR cares. The role of HR is so much bigger than what we see. But HR does genuinely care, because persons would think that HR is a punitive space. You only approach HR or go to HR when there's a problem, when there's an issue, and that is not the case. HR is your problem solver. HR is the person that ensures that you thrive within your organization. Make sure that persons are rewarded for doing just work, hard work. So essentially your HR is your planner, your counselor, your mitigator, your outer of many fires. And there are so many misconceptions, but I'm here to debunk some of those.
Okay. I'm listening. Now, I'm thinking, if these misconceptions
Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
exist, and you're in the space, you work in the space professionally, what are some of the I'm trying to think what would have given rise to so many of these misconceptions that employees, that workers have about HR. You have any thoughts on what may have given rise?
I think that as humans, we tend to first jump to our emotions, how we feel at any given time. And I too I'm human. So if a situation comes up, let's say for instance, you're being approached by the police, the first thing that you're going to jump to is defense. You know, I have to be able to defend. Well, does the police want? Why am I being stopped? Why will I be arrested?
Yeah.
Should I say anything? Do I need a lawyer? And and I make that analogy simply because when HR calls, that is the same thing or the same thought process that a person actually goes through in their minds. HR calls, something must be wrong. What am I being called for? Should I call?
Yeah.
So there's a defense. And persons often think that when HR calls, something must be wrong and not something is actually right. So again, I'm here to debunk that HR should not be a punitive space, but looked at objectively as the person who calls to communicate, the person who calls to follow through, the person who makes sure that they do their regular checkups to say, I noticed that you were sick yesterday. I am checking in on you to make sure that all is well, everything is okay. So debunking the misconceptions and again to say that it's human nature for persons to think that this is a punitive space. Let me jump to the first thing that I feel.
Okay, so now let's talk about HR and employee performance evaluations, because many employees encounter HR in that space under those circumstances as well. And in some cases, you may not be satisfied with your performance evaluation and review. But talk about the role of HR with regards to that.
So I think that persons should welcome performance reviews first and foremost. Again, people think that conversations are had when the bad things happen, which should not be the case. For us to know how we're doing, we have to do an assessment. For us to know where we're going, we have to do an assessment, right? And the role of HR in that is to sit with you, have a conversation. Of course, your immediate manager as well or supervisor will sit with you and perform that assessment, but involve you in the process as well. HR is then involved to do a follow-up to say, okay, we're looking at the gaps, we're assessing the strengths, and we're looking at areas of opportunity. Because at the end of the day, when persons work within your operation or organization, for us to continue to grow, I don't just need to address the bad things that you've done. I address the great things that you've done, but I look at the areas where I can strengthen and develop you as a person, which benefits the organization that we serve. So when I look at a performance review, I look at it from a holistic standpoint. I say, okay, these are the great strengths that you have, and this is what we'll use to continue to drive the operation. And then these are the areas of opportunities. These are the areas where I think that you can be strengthened. These are the persons within the organization who have mastered this. These are a list of training opportunities that come up or will come up that will help to guide you. Or even I too as HR, I have noticed that these are some areas where you can grow, and I as HR will assist to mentor and guide you to get yourself better so that the next time around when we're looking at this performance review, we can come out on the brighter side of things. And that is how I look at performance review from an HR standpoint, and that is how performance reviews should be looked at.
So employees, again, a review or performance review isn't an attack on you, correct?
Definitely not.
Yeah, but for some reason, again, people seem to see some employees seem to see these things as an attack. Now, let's move on a bit further. How can employees use performance reviews to advance their career? So looking at it in a positive way, not as an attack or anything like that, but in a way that can push your career forward.
I would say objectively. Again, we're all human, and I think that introspection plays a big role in that. when you look at the good, you feel good. When you look at things that aren't so favorable, you have to pull yourself back to examine them to say, can I really do better at this? Or what do I need to be able to become better at this? So they can use it to use performance reviews to advance their careers by looking at it from an objective standpoint. I think doing introspection, being open to feedback, listening and saying, okay, I've heard point A, but how can I work better to, let's say, for instance, improve my communication skills? Is it something that I may need assistance with? Is there anyone within the organization who has a specific communication style that I would like to emulate? So I think it's about being objective, one, two, being open to feedback, asking questions, because you're never above learning new things a different way. So asking questions as well, and that too will help an employee to look at a performance review positively.
Okay, so let me ask you this now. A complaint that often comes up is that my performance review, it was not fair. How does HR ensure that they are fair in their reviews?
Okay, so I would have mentioned that, the person that works, so HR does not specifically work with you 24/7. HR is an oversight and does see the work that you do. And your immediate supervisor or manager adds input to that, right? There are some instances where, as HR, the professionals, if a performance review is not favorable to an employee, then HR sits and looks at it and says, okay, what is your feedback? Because you have to ask the necessary questions. What in this performance review that you're not in favor of? Let's say it's inconsistency as it relates to disciplinary, or a person may feel like I did X and I got marked down for it, but I saw another person do Y or the same X and they weren't marked down for it. It opens a bigger conversation for HR to look at it from a holistic standpoint to say, okay, as HR, I'm looking at this performance review. Maybe we need to look at the broader scope of things. It says, or it gives you a message as HR to look holistically at things, but it also gives you a tool as a feedback for you as HR to look at the organization. So you can assure a person, you can say, I understand that this is not favorable in your opinion. And what we can do as a company is work to address some of the inconsistencies. And what we can also do is speak with your immediate superior or manager to get a general understanding of where the disparities are. Because if someone is saying something to you regarding their performance review, you have to take it into consideration. Some persons, they're more or less negative in every performance review. And you know that you're going to get the negative feedback, and you know that that person is going to be an underperformer, and you know that person is going to say, well, I still am not in agreement with it. But at the same time, as I said, you still have to look at everything objectively, because everything forms a piece of the puzzle to give you the tools that you need as HR to function.
Yeah, fantastic, absolutely. Now, another question I have, how can workers, employees advocate for themselves professionally and effectively?
I would say communicate, document. If you have a situation, respectfully speak to your supervisor, respectfully engage HR, learn about your rights, and those are some of the key areas.
Okay, now for employees who may feel intimidated, and I know there are many employees that feel intimidated about approaching HR, what's your advice to them?
My advice, this is a tough one. Speaking from where I sit, it's not always what you think.
Okay.
Because HR is seen as the police, the business police, the fire marshal. And I would say still try to have those conversations, respectfully approach, schedule your meetings, say, I have a genuine concern, and this is how I'd like to approach, that concern that I have. Again, write a letter, express your concerns that way. So those are some of the, I never advise going away from HR, running away from HR, because having that simple conversation or that light conversation can turn into something that blossoms beautifully when you would have stepped into the situation overthinking it in the first place.
Correct, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And sometimes, difficult conversations just have to be had.
That is true.
You can't escape it. You can't skirt around the issue because what? The issue isn't going to get solved by not talking about it. So even though you may feel uncomfortable, uneasy about it, it's worth going and still making an effort to have that conversation, correct?
Absolutely.
All right, fantastic. Now, I've been around the union for some time now, and there are instances where I've heard like an employee approach the union about the issue, and when you dive deeper into it, you might find out, okay, well, the union officer may say, oh, no, that's an HR issue, that's not a union issue. Help us distinguish the difference between HR issues and union issues.
So, HR issues is anything stemming from policies and procedures, the standard of which you operate, hiring, and training, onboarding, etc. A union issue is more so collective bargaining agreement, wages, salary increases, and those are some of the conversations, and even grievances. Okay. So I would say those things are union issues.
Are there any areas where they may overlap or there may be some overlapping?
Yes, because you would want to come to me first as a HR if you have a grievance rather than going directly to the union. So as it relates to grievances, there are some overlapping factors. I would say again to wages, because if you have a genuine concern as it relates to wages, I'd prefer you approach HR to speak to the issue rather than just going directly to the union, because all conversations must start in-house first, amicably, before escalation, of course.
Okay. Now, tell us, how can unions and HRs work together to create better working conditions for everyone?
I would say that there has to be that mutual relationship between the union and HR. I know when HRs hear union, it's like, oh boy, but it actually should be a smile on the other end or on both ends, because for me, I welcome having conversations with the union. I think having that mutual understanding and mutual conversation, you understand where the employee is coming from and the union, and likewise, the employer understands and the union understands from both sides of the spectrum where each other is coming from. And it's never about to fight. It's always about mutual understanding and everybody coming out on the better side of things. So, yes, ma'am.
No, I like that.
Yes. So I think that, and even better communication between HR and the union, because let's say there's an issue that comes up. I think that once the union comes in and an employee has a genuine issue and they go directly to the union, it's always to make sure that we understand what has happened, and then we understand where the employee is coming from. We understand why the employee hasn't approached us to say, these are the challenges, or this is the challenge that I'm having. So it gives you a scope to look at things from a broader perspective. But I would say that the union, likewise, employer and the HR should form better synergies as it relates to communication and being, having that mutual understanding.
Fantastic. All right. So what's if there's one thing that folks watching you'd want them to take away from this conversation about HR, what would it be?
HR genuinely cares.
Sincerely.
Sincerely. And HR's role, as much as there's a misconception, is about people, not just people as bodies, but genuinely people from the heart. A big part of any organization or operation is its people. And HR has to drive that and to ensure that from a holistic standpoint, the people who support the organizations are well taken care of, because without our people, there's no organization.
Well said. And my hope is that our audience, which of course will include primarily employees, members of the union, that this conversation will help to, as we said earlier, dispel some of the misconceptions, and that employees would have a more positive attitude and approach towards HR, so that the benefits will flow and that conversations would flow, and that we'll have a more positive working environment. Ms. Spencer, thank you so much for spending time with us here on the Workers Podcast, and I do hope to have you back sometime again in the future.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Viewers and listeners, you've been watching another episode of the Workers Podcast. I'm R. Anderson Edgel. Thank you for tuning in, and we do look forward to seeing you again on another episode. Bye-bye for now.